very excited to have Senator Cruz here. I have promised him that in a day we have filled with many big fireside chats that we would have the best one. So all killer and no filler. And with that, we'll jump right into it. So central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. There are a lot of folks in this room that cringe at just that acronym. You introduced the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act, which would prohibit the Fed from issuing a CBDC directly to anyone. In introducing that bill, you said a CBDC would intrude on the privacy of citizens to surveil their personal spending habits, which is why Congress must clarify that the Federal Reserve has no authority to implement a CBDC. Can you explain to us why you think a CBDC issued by the Fed is so dangerous?
Yeah, look, I think a CBDC would be absolutely disastrous. I think it would be designed, number one, to be a very direct threat to Bitcoin and crypto generally. But number two, I think it would be the government effectively trying to reclaim what it believes to be its monopoly on currency. And number three, it would be, as you were just describing, a vehicle for surveillance. There are voices in our political process that want to actively monitor every single financial transaction Americans make. And it's important to understand, look, as everyone here knows, China banned Bitcoin. Why did China ban Bitcoin? Because they couldn't control it. And they want to control the financial lives of their citizens. It's important to understand China hates Bitcoin for the same reason Elizabeth Warren hates Bitcoin. In both instances, they want to monitor and control financial transactions. If you look at Joe Biden's bill, it was called Build Back Better. I called it Build Back Broke. One of the elements in it didn't ultimately pass, but one of the elements in it that you had the Biden administration pushing very hard for was a requirement that banks report to the federal government on every single financial transaction you engage in, $600 or more. So that means literally every rent payment, every mortgage payment, every car payment. We're not that far off from every time you fill a tank of gas. I mean, they want complete visibility in how you spend your money because visibility gives you control. A CBDC is a powerful tool for doing so. It's why China likes it. And I think it would be terrible for the federal government to go down that road. Now, I've introduced legislation to prohibit it. At this point, the Democrats are not supporting that legislation. And I think there is a very real risk of the Fed trying to do this on their own. You know, I'll say Jay Powell, who chairs the Fed, he's a very smart guy, he's a very talented guy. He's very good at being all things to all people. So when Jay Powell comes and sits in my office, he sounds like a Milton Friedman free market economist. He sounds fantastic. What worries me is that I'm concerned when he sits in Elizabeth Warren's office that he addresses her as comrade. And in Washington, there's a lot of that. And so I have a very real concern we will see unilateral action trying to implement a CBDC, and I think we need to fight hard against that.
And I guess in a related question, do you see a future for a digital dollar? And if so, what does that look like?
I don't want there to be a digital dollar that is government controlled. I think crypto and Bitcoin in particular certainly fills that role and can fill the role. And what I love, look, there are lots of things. I am bullish on Bitcoin and crypto for many, many reasons. But one of the core reasons is the exact mirror image for why the Chinese communists and the American socialists hate it. They hate it because they can't control it. I love it because government can't control it. I want power to be decentralized, not just with distributed ledgers, but with individuals making their own financial decisions without Washington in charge. And that is a battle that is front and center playing out every day.
And so listen, let's take it to that other end of the spectrum. So something very near and dear to my heart, Bitcoin. It's no secret you've been bullish and have been for a while. I've heard you in the past speak about your feelings about Bitcoin. I guess, you know, how did you first get involved with Bitcoin? How did you first start to understand it? You know, what's your involvement? How do you think about it?
Well, I remember about a decade ago, a friend of mine was urging me to invest in Bitcoin. And I said at the time, I said, look, I don't really understand it. And so I try not to invest in things I don't understand. the time Bitcoin was trading about $300, so that was a spectacularly stupid decision on my part. So I did not listen to my friend a decade ago, and I started investing in Bitcoin about 4 years ago. In 2022, when it dropped, I bought the dip and felt quite good about that. And I have right now an automatic buy order. So every Monday morning, I have an automatic Bitcoin buy. It's not huge. I have about 2.5 Bitcoin. So that for the folks of you that are mining like crazy, that you may have made that this morning. But I am a government employee, so I'm pretty happy with that weekly buy order. And I will tell you something I'm excited about. I'm actually right now in the process of buying 2 or 3 miners and actually becoming, I am not yet a Bitcoin miner, but I hope the next time I'm here to be a miner as well.
Well, we're going to get to that. That's fantastic to hear. And by the way, Senator, you passed the first test, which I think everyone in the room will understand. Everyone has a story about how they didn't buy Bitcoin at some lower price when they should have, and you have to get past that test to get there. So why don't we pull on that? You mentioned mining. So that's obviously, it has exploded in Texas. My company, Cipher Mining, has many data centers in Texas. We're building another one. Largely, it's popular due to the availability of cheap renewable power. I think many Bitcoin miners in the room call Texas home, but maybe for those who haven't gotten the joke yet, you could tell us, well, why do you think Texas has been so successful in attracting Bitcoin mining operations to the state? Sort of what's unique about Texas, because this is a truly global competitive business.
Right.
Why Texas?
So look, I want Texas to be the oasis for crypto in general and for Bitcoin mining in particular, and I want everyone in the Bitcoin world to come to Texas. Now, I will admit we have competition right now, primarily from Florida, and you know what? I think that's a great thing. I actually like having competition. I think it would be bad if Texas were the only game in town. I want Florida to compete with us and say, no, we can create an environment that is even more welcoming to small businesses and job creation. That back and forth is a very healthy competition. Look, I think there's a lot about Texas. Number one, the culture of the state. You look at the history of Texas. Texas is a state that was founded by a bunch of wildcatters. It was founded by a bunch of guys with 4th grade educations who began drilling holes in the ground. And one after the other, they became the richest men on earth. And that ethos is fundamentally who Texas is. There's a frontier mentality. Years ago, I was meeting with a CEO and a group of executives who had moved their company from California to Texas. And I was having lunch with them. And I said, tell me, what are the biggest differences? And I kind of thought maybe they'd say taxes, maybe they'd say regulations, maybe they'd say lawsuits. Those were sort of the 3 things I suspected were going to be the answers. Tyler, the answer shocked me. They said the biggest difference is the culture. Mm-hmm. And they said in California, if you're in business, you're a pariah. They said, like literally you'd be at a cocktail party and someone would ask, what do you do? And you'd say, oh, I'm in business, and people would turn around and walk away. And they'd say, now look, there were exceptions. Tech was okay, and entertainment was okay. You could be in Hollywood, but if you were in something mundane that wasn't sexy, being in business was bad. And I remember just being shocked at that, because in Texas, we revere entrepreneurs. My hometown is Houston. I think Houston is the most entrepreneurial big city on the face of the planet. I mean, it is a town where it's also the most diverse big city in America. It's a town where anybody can come from anywhere, and if you have a vision and you have passion and talent and you're willing to work hard, you can achieve anything, and nobody cares who your daddy is. There's some places where if you're not 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation, forget it. Texas has a spirit of go do it. Now, you combine that with, for mining, obviously, energy is critical, and you need reliable, low-cost energy. And if there's one thing Texas knows how to do is energy. And so I think that combination of the energy capital of the world combined with a libertarian embrace of entrepreneurship and individual freedom. Look, Texas, I have no concern the state of Texas is going to want to monitor every financial transaction you engage in. And I don't think that's going to change. I think Texans want to be left alone. And I will say in the crypto community, so I've spoken at a lot of conferences, and it's been interesting. I think a lot of the folks in the crypto community I'd say 5 or 10 years ago, were fairly apolitical, kind of focused on their own thing and not really like, what does politics matter? To the extent they were political, some folks kind of thought they were Bernie bros and sort of felt kind of on the left of the political aisle. And I think a lot of the crypto world is looking around going, wait a second, those folks that I thought I was, they want to put me out of business. And that's a very real dynamic, that if you are in favor of government control, understand Bitcoin is a powerful threat to the government monopoly on currency. It's a powerful hedge against out-of-control spending and inflation. And I do think there's a little bit in the crypto community of a sense of sort of, we are inevitable. And that can be dangerous, because I'll tell you, in my view, there is one force powerful enough to destroy crypto, and that is the United States government. And I think if the community does not focus on the danger, Communist China managed to crush it in China. And for folks who say, well, if America does that, the world will go on, you know, I don't know how many people here have your El Salvadorian passports. The U.S. government could do enormous damage, and so I think it's worth being very well aware of that threat and who is it that wants to use that power.
Well, and two things I can confirm from my seat. I think Bitcoin mining has come a long way. Bitcoin has come a long way, thanks in part to efforts of folks like you advancing the discussion in the halls of power. Starting a business where that kind of risk hangs over the head, you know, like the sword of Damocles, is very challenging. And only in a place like West Texas where you can find that can-do attitude. That's been exactly our experience. The history of wildcatting and entrepreneurship, it is exactly logical that these very modern data centers that harvest today's commodity are surrounded by 40 miles of rolling hills and pump jacks.
Yep.
It fits perfectly with the ethos of the people. So let's talk about the halls of power, since obviously you are in the room where it happens, as they say. And I think one of the challenges for folks on the private sector side of this industry is understanding just what the conversations are like with your colleagues. We're trying to understand striking the balance with education. How do we get involved? What's the right way? What's that education process like? What behind closed doors, what are those discussions like?
So I will say Otto von Bismarck famously said there are two things you never want to see being made: sausage and legislation. And between the two, legislation is uglier. I will tell you the level of ignorance in Congress, and especially the United States Senate, on Bitcoin and crypto is staggering, and it would terrify you. You know, you asked about my getting into Bitcoin. I'd say it was 4 or 5 years ago where I said, look, this is growing, this is significant, I need to learn more about it. And I began setting up a series of dinners of just meeting with people in the industry, meeting with experts, and sitting there for 2, 3, 4 hours just asking questions and just like, you know, trying to ask dumb questions. Well, what is this? Explain this. How does this work? And you know, you do it over a bottle of wine or two and suddenly it starts to all make sense. But diving in, you know, you look back a few years ago when legislation passed that had a provision in it, as you guys know, to regulate miners as broker-dealers and security dealers. And that was added. At the time the Senate was considering it, I don't think there were 5 senators who could tell you what a Bitcoin was. I mean, the level of ignorance is staggering. I will say, if you ever want to feel young, come serve in the United States Senate. The median age is like 106. You know, I have a colleague of mine who not too long ago referred to the internet as a system of tubes. This is not a tech-savvy bunch. And so I stood up on the Senate floor with a motion to strike that provision regulating Bitcoin. And listen, do there need to be rules of the road and some regulations concerning Bitcoin? Sure. But my view is we need to proceed slowly and carefully and make sure we understand what we're doing. And there are all sorts of questions as this goes forward that are going to have to be answered. Right now, when Washington acts, nobody knows what they're doing, and there's a chaos element of it. Some of it is driven. There are voices. As I said, Elizabeth Warren is incredibly hostile to Bitcoin. Most of the senators are clueless. I would say the two who are most engaged on the Senate side are myself and Cynthia Lummis. And Cynthia is a good friend. And I would say today, compared to 4 years ago, there are more senators that are starting to say, okay, what is this stuff? But it's still at a very early stage. And so engaging in those conversations and that basic education, I think, is hugely important.
Well, I mean, I will tell you, I think what I've seen that's been very encouraging has been less of a discussion of trying to get down to understand necessarily like how every piece of the technology works, but understanding why is this valuable, why do we care?
Right.
What do we want to regulate, what's important? Most people don't know how email works. They
Yep.
might pull out their phone and they send 100 of them a day, but they don't actually know any of the technology. And so part of it, I think, is steering that discourse, and it seems like you've been very successful at doing that. So please keep up the good work on behalf of the industry. So let's talk, you mentioned some of the folks that may be more anti-Bitcoin.
Yep.
One of the sort of attack vectors on the surface that we've seen is that environmental groups like Earth Justice and Greenpeace have argued that Bitcoin mining is detrimental to the environment due to high energy consumption. I mean, how do you respond to those critics who believe mining is inherently harmful to the environment, and are there environmental concerns that would need addressing while supporting the growth of the mining industry more broadly?
So those are certainly attacks that are directed at Bitcoin mining, and I think there are a couple of things. Number one, on the far left, there is just opposition to anything that consumes power, and mining consumes a whole lot of power. There is, secondly, on the far left, if you are a collectivist, if you are a socialist, if you are a Marxist, you want government control. Bitcoin and crypto generally is an existential threat to government control. But when it comes to the environmental aspects, look, I want to encourage the industry that y'all need to do a better job telling your story. And it's easy to focus on what you're doing in your business and not pay attention to the broader context. But Margaret Thatcher famously said, first you win the argument, then you win the vote. And I think you need to engage in the actual argument. So for example, on the environmental side, I think Bitcoin mining is incredibly positive and beneficial for the environment. For example, you're out in West Texas. As you know, there are many natural gas.
Wind and solar farms as well.
Well, but there's also flared gas. There's a lot of places where you drill for oil, and you've got gas along with the oil, and there's not enough gas to make it profitable to run a pipeline and sell the gas. And so what do you do instead? You flare it. You light it on fire. And so out in West Texas, you can look and just see fires lighting the horizon of natural gas just being burned. Now, that's not great for the environment. One of the really powerful things about Bitcoin is you can go to flared gas, you can capture that gas, put it in to produce electricity, and have it generate Bitcoin right there at the wellhead. That is a powerful way. That's much better for the environment to take that natural gas instead of flaring it, put it to productive uses. And so it gives you the ability to monetize natural gas in a place where it is otherwise not monetizable. Likewise, for wind and solar, there are a lot of places where the sun shines a lot or the wind blows a lot, but they're nowhere near the electricity grid. And what Bitcoin gives you the ability to do is set up whether it is solar panels or a windmill, and if you don't yet have the money and the profitability to wire it to the grid, to take that power and generate it right there to generate Bitcoin, it gives you an ability to monetize the first dollar of an investment into an alternative. And so that is potent as well. And to incentivize, and ultimately, let's say you set up a big enough wind farm, it may become profitable to run power lines, but the first one is not. And so there's a strong positive environmental story to be told, but there's also a story from the grid, which is I think Bitcoin mining is incredibly valuable for resiliency of the grid. One of the ways to think of Bitcoin mining is basically as a battery. Mm-hmm. And we've got right now more and more Bitcoin mining coming into Texas. Well, if we have an extreme weather event, it's either very, very hot, people are running their ACs, or it's very cold, and you're losing power generation. The beauty of Bitcoin mining is in 1/10 of a second, you can turn it all off. And if you turn it all off, all of that power is instantly available to go to heat and cool people's homes, to keep hospitals and businesses running. And so it's a reservoir. One of the challenges with electricity, it's very hard to store. You can't just dig a hole and stick it in there. And what Bitcoin mining gives you the ability to do is have a use for that electricity 364 days a year where it's generating positive cash flow. And on the one day a year where there's a crisis, you can instantaneously divert that electricity to a life-saving need. That's beneficial for the grid and it's beneficial for the environment.
And I can tell you that's exactly what Cipher Mining will be doing with hundreds of megawatts in Texas this summer when it gets hot.
Yeah.
So couldn't agree more.
And it becomes, the beauty of the market, that becomes an easy decision. Once the electricity is priced at a point that you make more money putting it on the grid than mining, you're not going to keep your miners running at that point.
It helps the grid, it helps the citizens of Texas, it helps our company do better. So it is a win-win-win situation.
Absolutely.
Well, Senator, on behalf of the Chamber and everyone here, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Ted Cruz.